pursuit of happiness. 4 words that encapsulate all human endeavor. Whether that's increasing our possessions, improving our relationships, progressing our careers, it all boils down to this. But as we all know, that in between those highs, there's turbulence, there are challenges. So how do we keep going? All of us have some special programming within us. It's called hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation is a mechanism that gets us to stretch all the time. So once we've reached our goal, our objective, that becomes our next plateau, and so we look for more. But at the same time, it also protects us. Hedonic adaptation reminds us that when we've been through challenges and turbulent times, the lessons that we need to bear in mind for the future. The past 2 years, we've all lived through unprecedented times. When we look back through history, some of us will look back at this time as a time of pain, a time of lockdown, a time of trauma. Whilst others will look back at this time as a time when they grew, a time when they reinvented themselves, a time for new opportunities. I'd like to share in this talk how you too can be one of those who look back at this time as a time of growth. Looking back at my life through the rearview mirror, I realized life is not just one game of chess. It's a series of games of chess. I've managed to get through multiple checkmate moments. But where did that all start? As a young child, I was always curious about human beings, our behavior, where happiness lies. I was that child who'd sit back and observe the world go past me. I came from an immigrant family where my parents left everything behind in East Africa to try and set up a brighter future for my brother and I. But I remember what those days were like. What I'd like to share today is a combination of my experiences, the study of inspirational people, lessons from ancient wisdom, and the latest neuroscience. What we believe ourselves to be is based on the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that we accept about ourselves, our limiting beliefs. And mine has been a journey of reprogramming those stories, reimagining them for a brighter future. Through my journey, I've developed a way of coming through these, which I'd like to share with you. A framework which I hope you too will be able to adapt and adopt to help you navigate through these highs and lows. The framework, I'd like to call it the 3R'S. What does it stand for? Reflect, reframe, and reset. So what does reflect mean? In the heat of the moment, in the face of the fire, when your mind is full of turbulence and noise, it's so difficult to stand back, to slow down. But it's important to stand back and just breathe. But how do we do that? Let me illustrate this to you. Imagine you're watching a movie. We've all done it. You have your favorite characters, and you root for them throughout the journey. Unlike those characters within the movie, you can see every player, every nuance, every dot. And so whilst you're watching this movie, you can usually suggest a pathway out into a happy ever after ending much quicker than the main characters. And that's what standing back and reflecting allows us to do. And then there's a reframe. So as we stand back and see the rest of the picture, the other dots, we can choose to join up the dots differently. So whatever our story has been based on our perception up until now, as we stand back, we can consider different pathways, and it allows us to make different choices. Life is a series of notes, a series of events, a series of stories, and how we choose to narrate them, how we choose to join them together is really our choice. And finally, reset. Reset is about hitting the hard reset button, letting go of what you can't control, and doing what you can, accepting the limitations of the past, but looking, based on your reframe, to the future. The way I'd like to illustrate this to you is through 3 checkmate moments from my life, which I hope somewhere along the line will resonate and help you understand how to apply it in your lives. So as I said, I came from an immigrant family. My childhood was all about my parents working every hour that God could send. And the only way that I knew to get out of this world, this kind of lifestyle, was to study hard, get the right grades, get a good degree, and a good career. Yet 3 years after studying something I really didn't enjoy, I was faced with receiving a 3rd-class honors degree, which meant nothing. It had no value to me. I was a failure. And in the narrative up until then in my life, that was it. I was doomed forever. I remember hiding my certificate, not telling anybody about it. So, where did the 3R's come into this? Well, firstly, I reflected. I stood back. And I remembered that as a child, I was smart. But somewhere along that line, that journey, I was on a different track to everybody else around me. But I still had that potential. I had to accept that whilst others were getting on with their careers, I had to start from where I was. But then I looked for inspiration. You know, at difficult times, look for people to inspire you, not to bring you down. And we've already had examples such as Einstein, who was written off as a school kid. And I'm sure many of you will relate to examples of where you've been written off, or others around you, but they've transformed their lives. And I decided there and then that I would reframe. I couldn't change the past, but I could take control of now. And I decided from that day onwards, I would be my best self every day. I'd set my own standards and make the most of every opportunity based from that moment. And lastly, to reset, I had to let go of the baggage. That fear of failure, that belief that I was a failure, the labels that I had applied to myself. And I had to believe that the future started here. The great thing is, I've been able to go on to a career as an entrepreneur, to get involved in organizations internationally, to lead them, to speak internationally, and done things which I'd never believed I could ever have done if I had accepted that limiting belief of a failure with a 3rd-class honors degree. Which takes me on to the next leg of my journey. Almost a decade later, I was studying at a world-class university for an MBA here at Warwick, with an amazing cohort, excited about my future. And I was presented with an opportunity in business, which would mean that I could be part of something that was not just national, but international. 3 of us set up this business and worked crazily hard, day and night. We put everything into it. I'd never worked that hard in my life, but I believed in the dream. It would not only be an amazing business, but it would mean my family and I would never have to worry about money again. 2 years down the road, the stars aligned. Everything was in place. And our growth was just about how fast did we want to grow. We were going to grow exponentially. And in that moment, I felt, this is why all this hard work was meant to be. This is what it was meant to be for. But then, I was presented with a checkmate moment, which I really didn't expect. One day, one of the founding partners, there was 3 of us, took me for a walk. And he said, Sanjiv, you and I make this business tick. We're behind the success of this. And I've got this investor who's really keen to get involved. And I went, but we don't need the money. No, but he's really good, he's really influential, and he's very connected. And by the way, I've drawn up a service contract for you and I, fully expensed, as we deserve. And we can start drawing that as soon as the money comes into the business. I said, you and I, there's 3 of us. So this was where the checkmate moment came. He presented this equation to me. Investors' money, X amount, comes into the business. The 3rd shareholder, who wasn't party to this conversation, his shareholding goes to the investor, and that 3rd shareholder walks away without a penny. Wow, I really didn't expect that checkmate moment. So, back to the 3R's. I had to reflect. I had to stand back. Everything I'd worked for all those years, that tough childhood, that setback at getting this degree I didn't value, the fact that I had done an MBA and I was having a great time learning lots of things, and this business was about to take off. And yet, I was confronted with a stark choice. I either turn a blind eye to my conscience. My guru and my mentor, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, has taught me, in the joy of others lies our own, in the progress of others rests our own. I've watched him throughout his life walk the talk, but he also inspired me to try and walk the talk myself. So that was a stark choice I had. If I didn't agree, I had to accept the consequences. And the reframe. The choice I took was to be true to my values. I realized more about business in this situation than I probably did from my MBA. I realized more about what makes me tick, that my values and who I am are more important to me than money. And so, I decided I wasn't going to support this action and was prepared to live with the consequences. And trust me, the consequences were dire. He sent poison emails. He got our business account frozen as a director's dispute. And the journey through this was extremely challenging, but I never regretted it. Why? Because I reset. I did a hard reset. Now that I'd made that choice, I just had to look forward and believe that life can be led in a principled way, that I could walk the talk and lead others to do that. And the business eventually did turn around and we successfully sold it off. But that was a real checkmate moment for me. What else did I do with the reset moment? I decided that from here on in, I knew more about myself. My value was in helping others. So just as I'd been through the experience with my university degree, and I realized that wasn't the end of the world, and I started telling everybody I could that story. In the same way, I've used this insight from my MBA and my business experience to help countless leaders, individuals, to navigate and make different choices, to find their authentic self, and to avoid the pitfalls that I'd been through. Which leads me through to my final story, the ultimate checkmate moment. Let me take you back to early 2020, when this beast COVID-19 was spreading like wildfire from the east. In early March, it entered my home, and as the symptoms took over my body, I saw it unfolding in front of me, in front of my eyes, to all of my family members. That battle was like no other battle I've ever faced. Imagine being in a boxing ring. 3 minutes, you give it all. The bell rings and you stop and you recharge. But in that fight, you know there's 6 rounds or 9 rounds or 12 rounds and it's going to finish. You're going to rest. There was no such sight at the end of the tunnel, no light. And every day got worse and worse. And my father and I ended up in the ICU wards of 2 different hospitals. I remember arriving there and the consultant saying to me quite early on, I've seen these x-rays before, it's all over your lungs. But the good news is that you qualify for an ITU unit. Remember what that means. When there were body bags everywhere, mortuaries overflowing, there were tough choices, but I qualified at least. The last thing I remembered that day was to send a message to a monk, Brahma Vihari Swami, who I had known since he became a monk in 1981. He was my strength. And I remember sending him a message that said, my kids have great values. You'd be proud of them. Please look after them. A couple of days later, I woke up to the news that my father wasn't going to make it. And that's where I had to use the 3R's, to reflect. On the face of it, I was not going to be able to see him again, not be able to say goodbye, and I knew the limitations. But at the same time, I was able to stand back and realize that he'd spent 80 years of life living it to the fullest, that we'd created many, many memories together that will be our treasure forever, that the only thing I could now focus on and worry about is what I do from here. My family at home would be worrying about me. What would happen to them? I remember telling my parents, it's not time to, sorry, my parents, my family, it's not time to grieve, it's time to celebrate his life, and I will keep fighting. In the time since, the reframe was all about this, keeping up the fight, focusing on the future, and doing what I could. And if I didn't make it out, it wasn't because I was going to give up. And my reset was, what positive can come out of this? I was determined that if I got out of here, I would help and share as much as I could about this journey so others could navigate it differently. I would also relook at my life, which I have done through a platform called Sanjiv Speaks, that allows me to speak to more people about finding their authenticity, finding their path, and being true to who they are. I've been able to speak on international platforms and say what's in my mind because too many of us live with a mask on. And I want to share with you the fact that you can use the 3R's wherever you are in life, whether it's daily in a squabble or in something more meaningful and deep. Stand back and reflect. Remember to reframe, change the narrative because that becomes your story. Reset. Let go of your baggage. And remember, don't sweat the small stuff. Be the best person you are for each day. Thank you very much.